Welcome to the Secret Traditions podcast, where ancient wisdom meets modern minds.
Welcome back, everyone. We're diving back into Ramon Llull's The Book of the Order of Knighthood.
Always exciting to get back to this, yeah.
It is, isn't it? Last time, we kind of set the stage, right? Origin story of knighthood, the whole protecting the faith, defending the helpless.
The rigorous training they went through, all that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But chapters 4 and 5, I gotta say, they really threw me for a loop.
Oh, tell me about it. These chapters totally change what it even means to be a knight. You think it's all swords and armor, and then...
It's so much more than that. Like,
Yeah.
chapter 4, it's called The Office of the Knight, and honestly...
It reads like a job description, basically.
It does. And the qualifications, some of them are like, what?
Like Llull sat down and said, all right, here's what you need to be a knight. These are the skills. And it goes way beyond just fighting.
Okay, so spill it. What unexpected skills did a knight need, according to Llull?
Well, first one that pops out is diplomacy. Llull's like, knights, they got to be negotiators. Like, treaty-level stuff, understanding laws of war.
Whoa. So, sharp mind as well as a sharp sword.
Exactly. He even says they advise kings, like whispering in the king's ear about strategy.
Hold on, so more like advisors than just warriors.
Right. It's like, yeah, fighting's important, but how about preventing fights in the first place? And it gets even wilder. He's big on knights understanding legal stuff, too.
Wait, so lawyer knights. Now, that is not what I was expecting.
It's kind of brilliant when you think about it, though, right? Medieval knights, they weren't just soldiers. They were often lords, had to govern, make judgments.
So knowing some law, yeah, pretty important.
Exactly. But then Llull takes it a step further. He gets into ethical conduct. Big time. He's all about a knight's word being their bond, their actions showing integrity.
So skills and morals. High bar to set, right? This is like a serious ethic code he's laying down.
Absolutely. Character matters just as much as fighting ability. Knights, they're supposed to be role models, inspiring people by how they live.
Embodiment of chivalry, not just on the battlefield, but everywhere. This is starting to sound familiar, though, isn't it? Like, think about the Knights Templar.
Oh, yeah. Famous for their strict ethic code. All that piety, obedience, selflessness.
Warriors, sure, but morally disciplined in a way most soldiers weren't.
Exactly. It's almost like Llull's taking those existing chivalric ideas, but he's broadening them, making them even bigger.
Not just fighting for a king or country, but something more. Like, he keeps hammering on this protector of the weak thing.
All the time. Defending those who can't defend themselves, standing up to injustice. It's a theme throughout the book.
Like he's saying, personal glory, forget that. True knighthood. It's using your strength to help the vulnerable.
Yeah.
That's a pretty powerful message, even today.
Powerful and familiar, right? Like,
Yeah.
think about modern peacekeeping forces, groups like the Red Cross.
People fighting for social justice, human rights.
It's crazy how these old ideas still resonate, inspiring people to be courageous, compassionate.
Okay, so to recap, Llull's knights, they're diplomats, legal minds, ethical role models, and protectors. That is a packed resume.
And that's just chapter 4.
Oh boy, buckle up, because chapter 5, that's where Llull gets really into the ethics.
Now it gets interesting. It's not just what they do, but why they do it, how they live.
I have a feeling we're in for some surprises.
You have no idea.
Okay, so chapter 5. Llull's getting into the nitty-gritty of the knightly ethic code, right?
That's where things get fascinating, yeah. One thing that jumps out, humility. Like, even when they win, knights shouldn't be arrogant or boastful.
Huh. That's kind of unexpected. You'd think a warrior culture would be all about that kind of stuff.
I think Llull realizes that true strength is knowing your limits, and knowing victory usually comes from working together, not just one awesome dude.
It does go against that whole image of the cocky knight swaggering around.
Right, so humility, big one. But another thing that really struck me, respect for your enemies.
Whoa, hold on.
Llull talks about treating prisoners ethically, fighting fair. It's not the kill-em-all mentality you might expect from the Middle Ages.
Respecting your enemies, even in battle, that's a tough one to grasp, even now, W. Was anything going on back then that might explain why he was so insistent on that?
Well, think about it. He was writing during the Crusades, right? Religious fervor was super high.
But even so, focusing on ethics, even towards enemies, that's pretty forward-thinking.
Like he's trying to inject some humanity into a system that was often brutal and unforgiving, yeah.
So humility, respect for enemies. What else is in this code?
Well, he keeps coming back to protecting the innocent. It's like the foundation of everything for him.
It's been a constant theme, hasn't it? Like, if you're not protecting those who need it, you're not really a knight.
Exactly. All that other stuff, the diplomacy, legal knowledge, fighting skills, they're all to help achieve that goal, protecting the vulnerable.
It's a message that goes beyond the Middle Ages, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Makes you think of people today who stand up for what's right, risk themselves to help others.
Maybe not in literal armor, but same spirit. It's interesting, too, to compare Lull's code with other chivalric orders. Like, take the Knights Templar.
Oh yeah, the Templars. Super strict discipline, devout.
Right. Like Lull's knights, they saw themselves as protectors, especially of pilgrims to the Holy Land. Very clear mission.
So how did their code stack up to Lull's? Stricter, more relaxed.
Both emphasize piety, obedience, self-sacrifice, but Templars were much more military-focused. Lull's all about diplomacy and ethics everywhere, but for them, it was mainly about fighting.
So shared commitment to service and protection, but different approach. Templars, more specialized warriors, whereas Lull, it's broader, more nuanced.
Like, he took the whole idea of knighthood and said, how do we apply this to all of life? Expanded the scope.
It's so cool to see how different groups interpreted the same basic ideals in their own way.
And to get even more of that contrast, look at the Order of the Garter. Chivalry tied in with court life, aristocracy.
Ah, the Garter, all those fancy ceremonies, close to the English monarchy.
Exactly. And remember how Lull stresses loyalty to the ruler?
Super important to him. Knights serving their king faithfully, advising them.
Garter exemplifies that perfectly. Knights chosen by the king himself based on valor and loyalty.
So in that sense, very in line with Lull. Knight as the trusted advisor, the right-hand man.
But the Garter, with all the rituals and courtly stuff, it's a more refined version of knighthood, maybe even romanticized, compared to Lull's more grounded approach.
Fascinating to see how they each embodied the ideal in their own way. But throughout it all, with Lull, there's this one constant element. His faith.
Oh yeah, it's woven into everything he writes.
It's not just a background detail, is it?
Yeah.
How does that tie into his whole idea of knighthood?
It is the idea, pretty much. He sees knights as tools of God's will, like they're divinely appointed to bring justice to the world.
So it's not just a job or some social code, it's a holy mission.
Exactly. They're fighting for God, not just a king or a country.
Talk about responsibility, not just accountable to your boss, but to a higher power.
Right. And it makes you think about good versus evil, divine judgment, what it means to live a life worthy of that calling.
Deep stuff. Book about knights and we're ending up in philosophy class.
It is kind of wild. But to really get it, we got to step back and look at when he was writing.
Crusades, raging, intense religious feeling everywhere.
And for Lull, knighthood wasn't just some human invention. It was a divine order. The Crusades, they weren't just wars, they were holy wars.
So in a way, he's justifying all that violence by saying it's part of God's plan.
It's complicated. Can't really judge a 13th century guy by our modern standards.
History's messy like that, isn't it?
For sure.
Yeah.
And that's where we got to look at these old texts critically, but with an open mind, too. Lots to learn, even if we don't always agree.
Well said. So we've covered the different roles of a knight, the ethic code, Lull's belief in the divine purpose. But there's this one thing that keeps bugging me.
Oh, what's that?
Lull's vision is so idealistic, right?
Right.
But what about when it goes wrong? When knights don't live up to all this? He doesn't really address that, does he?
That's the tricky part. He sets the bar so high. And humans, well, we're human.
So we've been talking about Lull's big vision for knighthood. Not just warriors, but diplomats, protectors.
Upholding justice, all that. Yeah.
It's a lot to live up to. And as we wrap this up, I keep thinking, what happens when they don't? When knights fail to meet those ideals? Lull doesn't really talk about that, does he?
It's the missing piece, kind of. You've got this demanding ethic code, but people are people.
And history's full of examples of people in power abusing that power. Knights weren't exactly saints.
Oh, for sure. Think about the Crusades, right when Lull was alive. Brutal stuff, often driven by less than noble motives.
So how do we square that with his super idealistic vision? Was he just being naive?
I don't know about naive. I think he knew humans mess up. Remember how he's always emphasizing humility, knowing your limits? Maybe he saw his writing more as a goal to strive for, not a set of rules everyone could perfectly follow.
Makes sense. Aim high, but realize it's tough to hit the mark every time.
Right, and that's where the real takeaway is, I think. It's not about being perfect. It's about trying to be better. Always.
So even if he doesn't say it outright, the idea is there. Knights should be held accountable when they screw up.
Absolutely, and that's where it gets really interesting for us today. We don't have knights running around, but we still got power structures.
Governments, big companies, even those social media stars we mentioned before.
Right. Same question applies. How do we make sure that power is used ethically for the good of everyone, not just a few?
It's like we need to take Lull's knightly code and translate it into something modern. Checks and balances, but for all kinds of power, not just kings and stuff.
Exactly. And Lull gives us hints, I think, like his focus on humility. Maybe that translates to transparency in leadership today. Are people in charge open about their decisions, their motives?
And that whole "a knight's word is their bond" thing, that could be about how we hold our leaders accountable. Do they keep promises? Do they own up to their mistake?
Right. And just like knights were supposed to defend the helpless, well, who are the most vulnerable people in our society? Are those in power actually protecting them, using their influence to make things fairer for everyone?
So it's taking those core ideas of chivalry, courage, integrity, justice, service, and applying them to everyone with power, basically, not just guys in armor.
Exactly. Big challenge. But Lull's work gives us a framework. It's a reminder that trying to be a good leader, using your power the right way, that's not just a medieval thing. It matters now more than ever.
It's pretty amazing how this old book about knights ends up being so relevant to all this stuff going on in the world today.
It has use, isn't it? Shows that human nature, the problems we face, they don't really change that much. We may not be fighting dragons, but trying to be good, do the right thing, that's something we're all still figuring out.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive into Ramon Llull's The Book of the Order of Knighthood. Thanks for joining us.
Always a pleasure.
Until next time, keep those minds curious and keep diving deep.